Well, folks, ready for another story? You've already heard a couple of scary ones, but this one always makes me pause for a moment when I think about it. My name's Mr. Edgar, and I've lived in these mountains my whole life. I've seen a lot, but what happened on that July night is something I wouldn't wish on anyone. This isn't just a story, it's something I lived through myself. So are you ready to hear the truth about the darkness in these mountains? Mountain Nightmare, a camping story from California. I grew up in the mountains of California. My home has always been among the trees, rocks, and wild trails where the dawn comes with a quiet rustle of wind and the nights are deep as ink. But there's one night I can't forget, even though it happened more than 20 years ago. I'll tell you this story exactly as it happened. But first, let me warn you. After this, you might think twice before camping in the woods. It was summer, probably July. Back then, many tourists would visit our area, and I worked as a caretaker at a campground nestled in a canyon near a lake. One evening, a family arrived. A man, his wife, and their son, who looked to be about 12. They set up camp on a remote site that people usually avoided. Nothing unusual, just a somewhat neglected spot with an old trail nearby that hardly anyone used. By the time they pitched their tent, the sun was setting. I saw the boy playing with a ball near the campfire while his parents prepared dinner. Everything seemed perfectly normal, until night fell. Around 11 p.m., I was doing my usual rounds with a flashlight when I heard a sound that made me stop in my tracks. It was a high-pitched, mournful cry, almost like a child weeping. At first, I thought it might be a coyote. They sometimes make eerie sounds at night. But this cry didn't stop. It echoed through the trees, sending a cold, sticky fear through me, one I hadn't felt even as a kid. I decided to head toward that campsite to check if everything was all right. The path was dark, and my flashlight barely cut through the thick fog that had suddenly appeared out of nowhere. As I got closer, I noticed a light in their tent, but there was no sign of the family. The boy's ball lay in the middle of the path. I called out, "Hey, is anyone there? Everything okay?" No response, just a heavy, threatening silence that sent chills down my spine. Then I heard rustling in the bushes, just a few feet away. Turning my flashlight toward the sound, I saw a figure. It was the boy, but his face, it wasn't the same. His skin looked gray, almost translucent, and his eyes glimmered like glass. And then he whispered, "They took my parents. Help me." I tried to step closer, but he suddenly vanished into the darkness, as if he had dissolved into thin air. Forgetting all caution, I rushed to the tent. Inside, no one. Their belongings were scattered, their food untouched, and their lantern still lit. But the most terrifying thing was on the ground. Footprints, not human. Large, elongated, almost wolf-like, but with deep grooves, as if from claws. They led into the forest. I decided to head back to my cabin and call for help, but on the way I heard that same crying sound. This time it came from right behind me. I turned and something darted between the trees so fast that I only managed to see a shadow. The next morning I told everything to the sheriff. We searched the entire campground but found no trace of the family or any evidence except for those strange footprints. That site was closed off to visitors and I quit my job a few weeks later. What was it? I don't know. But sometimes when the wind at night carries a long, mournful cry, I'll remember that night and think, maybe there are things in the mountains we aren't meant to disturb. So my friends, if you ever find yourself camping in California and hear a cry, stay in your tent, because whatever's out there in the dark might be looking for you. Well, what do you think of the first story? A bit chilling, isn't it? You're not too scared, are you? Everyone okay? Because I can see some of you holding onto your blankets a little tighter. Alright then, hold on tight, because the next story, it's even more terrifying. Are you ready to hear what can happen if you camp in the wrong company? The Shadows of Red Ridge RV Park. I'll never forget what happened at Red Ridge RV Park. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway with friends, a break from the grind. There were 5 of us, me, Jake, Tyler, Amanda, and Lisa. We had been friends since college, and a road trip with the RV felt like the perfect way to reconnect. None of us could have known that by the end of the weekend, we'd all leave that place different, and one of us wouldn't leave at all. The park was tucked away in the woods, far from the nearest town. A quiet spot with a view of the mountains. It seemed perfect at first. We arrived late in the afternoon, setting up camp in one of the more secluded spots near the edge of the park. The RV sites were spaced far apart, surrounded by towering pines, and there were only a few other campers. That first night was normal. We grilled burgers, drank a few beers, and laughed about old memories around the fire. The stars were bright, the air crisp, but around midnight, things started to feel off. It began with the noises. At first, it sounded like branches snapping in the distance. We figured it was wildlife, maybe a deer or raccoon, but as the night went on, the sounds got closer and they didn't feel random anymore. It wasn't the normal rustling of animals, it was deliberate, steady footsteps. "Do you hear that?" Amanda whispered, clutching her jacket tighter. Jake, ever the skeptic, laughed it off. "It's just the woods. Relax." But Lisa didn't look convinced. She kept glancing over her shoulder toward the dark tree line. "It feels like someone's watching us." We teased her about being paranoid, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel it too. That creeping sensation at the back of your neck when you're not alone. By 2 a.m., the fire was dying down and we decided to call it a night. Everyone headed to the RV, but I stayed behind to douse the fire. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of someone whispering my name. "Chris." I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The voice was soft, almost melodic, but it was coming from the woods. I shone my flashlight toward the trees, but there was nothing there. "Chris." It came again, closer this time. I didn't wait to investigate. I bolted to the RV, locked the door behind me, and tried to shake it off as my imagination. But inside the RV, things weren't any better. Tyler was standing by the window, staring out into darkness. "What are you looking at?" I asked. "There's someone out there," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. We all crowded around the window, but there was nothing, just the shadows of the trees swaying in the wind. "Tyler, you're freaking us out," Amanda said. "I swear I saw someone, right there by the picnic table," he insisted. Jake rolled his eyes. "We're all just tired. Let's get some sleep." Reluctantly, we agreed and turned in for the night. But sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the RV felt like a threat, every gust of wind like a whisper. Around 3 a.m., we were jolted awake by a loud bang on the side of the RV. "What the hell was that?" Lisa screamed. Jake grabbed a flashlight and opened the door, stepping outside despite our protests. "Stay here," he said. We watched from the window as he scanned the area, the beam of light shaking in his hand. Then the flashlight went out. "Jake?" I called. No answer. "Jake, stop messing around," Tyler shouted. The silence was unbearable. Then, from the darkness, we saw him stumble back toward the RV. He was pale, his eyes wide with terror. "What happened?" I asked as he climbed inside, slamming the door behind him. There's something out there," he stammered. "It's not human." Before we could ask anything else, the RV lights flickered and went out. The generator died, leaving us in complete darkness. That's when we heard the sound, the scratching. It was coming from the roof. Slow, deliberate, like claws dragging across metal. We huddled together, barely breathing, as the scratching moved from one side of the RV to the other. Then it stopped. For a moment, there was silence, and then something slammed against the window. Lisa screamed, and we all scrambled to the back of the RV. When we finally dared to look, the window was cracked, but whatever had been there was gone. We didn't wait for morning. Jake got the RV started, and we tore out of there as fast as we could, leaving the campsite and whatever was in those woods behind. A week later, we learned that Red Ridge RV Park had been closed before years ago, after several campers disappeared under mysterious circumstances. It had only recently reopened. To this day, none of us know what we encountered that night. We don't talk about it much anymore, but sometimes when the wind howls late at night, I think I can still hear that voice whispering my name. Well, I see you've made it through 2 stories. Impressive. But tell me, how about one final dose of fear for the night? Think you can handle it, or should I save this one for next time? All right then, if you're brave enough, let me tell you about the one story that still keeps me awake some nights. The one that made even me question what's out there in the dark. Alright, if you really want to hear it, I'll tell you a story, but be ready. This won't be like the others. This one's different. I'm telling you, every time I think about that night, I still feel a chill. I don't even know why I'm still alive to tell you this. I was working at a camping parking lot by a lake back then. You know those places where no one's around and at night, it's hard to see anything more than 10 meters away? A lost corner by the shore where all the RVs are parked one after another and it's just trees, woods, and deep silence all around. It was an autumn evening, around midnight, and there were only a few cars left in the lot. We, the security guys, were sitting in our car thinking the night would go smoothly, but I noticed something odd. First off, the lake was unusually quiet. Usually you'd hear sounds if you tossed stones, or if some fishermen were getting ready for the morning, but here nothing, like a black abyss. So I stepped out of the car to check things, and I started walking toward where the last RVs were parked when suddenly I heard footsteps. They were right next to me, but when I turned around, no one. I kept walking, keeping an eye on the darkness, and then again, footsteps, like someone was walking beside me, but always in the dark. Every time I turned around, I couldn't see anything. Eventually, I decided to check one of the RVs to make sure everything was fine, and that's when I saw something I'll never forget. In the window, a dark figure. It wasn't moving, it was just sitting there, staring at me, but didn't say a word. I tried to get closer. I thought maybe it was one of the campers, asleep in their RV, and when I got closer to the window, it felt like a hammer hit me in the head. I didn't see a person. No, it wasn't that. I saw a pair of red eyes, glowing in the darkness, and there was no sign of a body, just pure air. But those eyes, they weren't just staring, they were burning like fire. I ran back to the car, grabbed the radio, and tried calling my colleagues. But they couldn't hear me. There was no signal at all. I went back again, looked at the RV, and its door was wide open. The window was clear. No one. I stood there for 10 minutes, not knowing what to do, when suddenly I heard a voice. The same voice, but not human. Something deep, low, something dreadful. I went back to my car and left. The next morning, I found out that there wasn't a single car there anymore. There's empty spots, and I never heard anything about those people again. But honestly, I think I've known for a long time that there's something in those woods waiting to take us. He looks at the listeners, making sure they understand the gravity of his words.